All right, this is chapter 3, section number 3, part 1. This is about the Northwest Passage and the beginning of colonization in North and parts of South America. While you're watching this video, I want you to keep 3 questions in mind to answer at the end. First question is, why did European nations want to find an alternative route to Asia other than what Magellan and da Gama had found? Second question was, what was the Pope's solution for solving the problem of who had the rights to claim new land in the New World? And then the third question I want you to be able to do is to name at least 4 countries that claimed the land or colonized the New World. All right, when we were talking in chapter 2, we learned about the Portuguese's attempt to find a new trade route to Asia. We know that the Mediterranean Sea and the Chinese Silk Road was controlled by the Muslims and by the Italians. No one was able to trade other than the Italians or the Muslims. So the Portuguese, under Prince Henry, set out to find an alternative route. For years, the Portuguese had been trading throughout the the western part of Africa. They had eventually kept going further and further south. Finally, a man by the name of Magellan decided he was going to try to go all the way around. Once he got over in this area here on the eastern side of Africa, he knew where he was at. He knew that it was a short distance from the eastern part of Africa to the Spice Islands in India. So now the Portuguese have a route of their own. But what about other countries? What about the Italians, for instance, or not necessarily the Italians, but other countries in general? One man by the name of Magellan sets out, and he knows that Christopher Columbus had discovered this land over here. And they know that this South America is pretty big, but they didn't know how big South America was. Magellan and his men decide that they are going to try to go around South America. They know the Pacific Ocean is here because Balboa discovered it. He went through the Isthmus of Panama. Magellan and his men take some 3 years, but they finally make their way around to the Indies. Magellan doesn't quite make it all the way back home. He is killed in the Philippines by some restless natives. His men escaped. They managed to make their way back home. But it was a few dozen of an original 60 or 70 that made it back. Okay, there were other people as well. John Cabot was an English explorer, and he set out to try to find what is called the Northwest Passage. It was too far to go around Africa this way, and it was too far to go all the way around South America to Asia that way. So they thought that, hey, if we just sailed north, up in the northern part of North America, we should be able to find a way that cuts straight through and then into Asia. That was the thought anyhow. John Cabot was sailing for the English. He makes several attempts. He explores this area here, the St. Lawrence Bay. He makes his way at the beginning of what is known as the Hudson Bay. He finds this little area up in here that he called a newfound land. Cabot thought that he sailed much farther than what Columbus did. He thought that he had found the way to the Indies. He thought he was just outside of China. In fact, his newfound land was just that, Newfoundland, which is part of Canada today. The French tried to get into the action of finding their own way as well. The first man to try to do so was a gentleman, last name was Verrazano. Verrazano, he sails straight across from France, and he makes his way into the middle Atlantic region of the United States today. He begins to explore up and down the coast of North America, every little inlet and bay and river that leads into it. He explores as far as he can to see if he can find that Northwest Passage, but he never does. Eventually, he gets up into this area here. He realizes he's in the same spot that Cabot before him had explored, and he decides to turn back. Next, we have another Frenchman by the name of Jacques Cartier. Yeah, the guy's got watches named after him in fine crystal, right? Okay, Cartier decided he was going to go much further north. He thought that the frozen North Atlantic, he would be able to slip through there. And he knew from Cabot and from Verrazano that this bay existed. So he decides he sails north of Newfoundland, and he makes his way up into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And he too realizes that it's not the Northwest Passage he's looking for, and he moves on. Next we have Henry Hudson. Henry Hudson was like the free agent of explorers in the day. His first and early expeditions was funded by the Dutch. And Henry Hudson explored what is modern-day New York region. He settled and claimed this land for the Dutch. They name it New Amsterdam. It becomes New York much later on. We'll talk about that later on. Several years later, the English have an idea where they would like Henry Hudson to go. He explores that area that Cartier and that Verrazano did not explore, up in the Hudson Bay area. He makes his way up. This is Canada right here. This is the Great Lakes. He makes his way all the way up into the Hudson Bay. And he wants to stay through the winter and try, once the ice thaws out, he wants to try and sail again. His crew had absolutely no problem with letting him stay. In fact, they loaded him up on a small little dinghy boat and left him. His crew wanted nothing to do with staying in this harsh, cold, frozen territory all winter long. In fact, they were scared that their boat would be crushed by the ice. And if they stayed, it probably would have. Nothing was heard from Henry Hudson again after that. All right, so the one thing that all of these explorers had in common, even though they didn't find the Northwest Passage, what they did do was start claiming land in the name of the country they were sailing for. What do they do with this land? Well, many of them started taking the Spanish's lead, and they started colonizing. Now, we got a big problem here. Everybody's starting to stake some claim to land and whatnot, but the Pope had to get involved. Remember, most of these countries, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the two major powers, as well as the French, and to some extent the English, are Catholic. And the Pope has a lot of power. So what the Pope says is here, everything west of this line belongs to the Spanish. Everything east of this line belongs to Portugal. Well, Spain and Portugal were the two most powerful nations at that time, so that's why the Pope decided to divide it up that way. But that didn't do anything for France and for England and for Sweden and for the Netherlands and a few other countries. So basically, those countries ignored what the Pope had said. There became a kind of land grab over this here. Obviously, because the Pope said they could, the Portuguese took control of this area here, which is Brazil. And still today, Brazil speaks Portuguese. Okay? The Spanish claimed all of this land. As long as it was a non-Christian country, they felt that they had the right to claim it and to change that religion into a Christian religion for that territory. Okay? The Spanish ended up claiming all of the red area. Okay? The Portuguese obviously claimed this area here. The Dutch, they had a little small claim in this area here. The English were claiming the land across the coastline. And the French claimed a lot of the Canada and parts of the Mississippi River and the Great Lakes. Okay? So now we're going to start getting competition. They've claimed this land, and now they're going to start finding some uses for it. And that's what we'll be talking about in later lessons. All right, when this video started, I asked you to keep several things in mind. Those questions were, once again, first of all, why did European nations want to find an alternative route other than Magellan's route all the way around South America, all the way to the Spice Islands in India? The second question was, what was the Pope's solution for solving the problem of who had the right to claim new lands? And then the final question that I asked of you was to answer me, or to tell me rather, 4 countries that claimed the land or colonized land in the New World, which was basically North and South America.